My son thought I was dead. For 6 years, Michael Carter replayed the same moment in his mind. Sometimes it happened in a park, sometimes in front of his old house, sometimes outside of school. No matter where his imagination took him, it always ended the same way. His son would see him, smile, and run into his arms. Reality was nothing like that. On a cool Monday morning, Michael stood outside family court with a small gift wrapped in faded blue paper. Inside was a plastic dinosaur. He had bought it for Ethan's 3rd birthday. The visit had been canceled. Then another, and another. Days became months. Months became years. Yet somehow, he could never bring himself to throw the gift away. Keeping it wasn't about the toy. It was about hope. If the gift still existed, then maybe one day, the chance to give it to his son would exist too. Michael looked down at the worn wrapping paper and gently brushed away a little dust with his thumb. A faint smile crossed his face. Then he whispered to himself, 6 years is a long time, but I hope you still like dinosaurs. The courthouse doors opened. People walked in and out carrying folders, coffee cups, and worried expressions. Lawyers hurried across the lobby. Children clung to parents they barely understood were fighting over them. For most people, it was just another day. For Michael, it was the day everything could change. A social worker stepped through the doorway. Behind her walked a small boy wearing jeans, a gray hoodie, and a backpack that looked almost too big for him. Michael's heart nearly stopped. It was Ethan, 9 years old now, so much taller than the last photograph Michael had secretly kept. His hair was a little darker, his face a little thinner, but there was no mistaking him. Then Michael noticed something else. Hanging from Ethan's backpack was a tiny green dinosaur keychain. Michael let out the smallest laugh. After all these years, his son still liked dinosaurs. Tears filled his eyes before he even realized they were there. The social worker gently guided Ethan into the room. Michael took one slow step forward, then another. His hands trembled. He smiled. Ethan, the little boy looked up. Their eyes met for the first time in 6 years. Instead of smiling, Ethan froze. His face turned pale. He quickly stepped behind the social worker and gripped her arm with both hands. His breathing became quick and uneven. The room grew strangely quiet. Michael's smile slowly disappeared. He looked confused. Then Ethan whispered, barely loud enough for anyone to hear, "Dead people." His voice cracked. Aren't supposed to smile. Every sound inside the courtroom seemed to disappear. The judge lowered her pen. The lawyers stopped writing. Even the social worker looked stunned. Michael felt the air leave his lungs. Slowly, he knelt until he was at Ethan's eye level. His voice shook. "I'm not dead." Another tear rolled down his face. "I'm your dad." Ethan stared at him. His little hands trembled. His eyes filled with tears. Then, in a voice filled with fear and confusion, he asked the question Michael had never imagined hearing. "If you're my dad." A long pause. "Why didn't you come for me?" Michael couldn't answer. Not because he didn't have one. Because 6 years of lies couldn't be undone in a single sentence. The silence between father and son felt heavier than anything either of them had ever carried. And somewhere beyond that silence, someone was praying the truth would never be discovered. The boy who feared his father. The courtroom remained silent long after Ethan's question faded into the air. "If you're my dad, why didn't you come for me?" Michael opened his mouth, desperate to answer. 1,000 memories rushed through his mind. Birthdays he had never been allowed to celebrate. School pictures he had only imagined. Bedtime stories he had never been given the chance to tell. But none of those words seemed big enough for this moment. Before he could speak, The judge gently cleared her throat. I think that's enough for today. The social worker placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. It's time to go. Ethan didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on Michael. He looked frightened, confused, as if everything he believed about his own life had suddenly become uncertain. Michael forced himself to smile. I know you're scared. His voice was barely above a whisper. But I promise you, I never stopped looking for you. Ethan lowered his head. The words seemed to reach him, yet they also created more questions than answers. Slowly, he allowed the social worker to guide him toward the courtroom door. Just before leaving, he stopped. He glanced back over his shoulder. Michael hoped he might smile or wave. Instead, Ethan looked at him with the cautious eyes of a child staring at a stranger. Then he disappeared into the hallway. The door closed. Michael remained standing exactly where he was. The room suddenly felt much larger than before. For 6 years, he had dreamed of seeing his son again. He never imagined their first meeting would end with fear instead of joy. Outside the courthouse, gray clouds drifted across the afternoon sky. People hurried past without noticing the man standing alone on the courthouse steps. Michael slipped the unopened dinosaur toy back into the paper bag. His hands trembled. He had waited 6 years to give it away. Now it felt heavier than ever. His phone vibrated. The screen displayed a single name. Sarah. He hesitated before answering. Hello. Her voice was quiet, almost exhausted. We need to talk. Then tell me why my son thinks I'm dead. Silence answered him. Finally, she spoke. Not here. She gave him an address. An old neighborhood cafe they had visited years ago before everything fell apart. I'll be there in 30 minutes, she said softly. The call ended. Michael arrived early. The cafe looked smaller than he remembered. The owner had replaced the faded wooden tables, but the familiar smell of fresh coffee still lingered in the air. He chose a table near the window. Every passing car caught his attention. Every face made him wonder who had spent 6 years keeping him away from his son. When Sarah finally walked inside, Michael barely recognized her. The confidence she once carried had been replaced by constant caution. She looked over her shoulder before closing the door. Then she scanned the room. Only after making sure no one seemed interested in them did she sit down. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Michael broke the silence. You told him I died. Sarah lowered her eyes. I know. He believed it. I know. He was terrified of me. A tear slipped down Sarah's cheek. I know. Michael leaned forward. Why? She looked toward the cafe window instead of meeting his eyes. Then she whispered words that made Michael's heart sink. Please. You need to leave before they start watching again. Michael frowned. They? Sarah immediately realized what she had said. She pressed her lips together. I shouldn't have said that. Michael's voice became firmer. Who is watching us? She shook her head. I can't. Sarah, I can't. Fear had replaced the guilt on her face. Real fear. The kind that cannot be faked. Before Michael could ask another question, Sarah stood abruptly. I'm sorry. She reached into her purse, placed enough money on the table to cover untouched cups of coffee, and hurried toward the exit. Michael followed her outside. She was already climbing into her car. The moment she drove away, another vehicle slowly pulled into the parking lot. A black SUV. Its windows were darkly tinted. The engine remained running. Michael looked toward it. The driver never stepped out, never looked away. For nearly a minute, the SUV remained perfectly still. Then, without warning, it pulled back onto the road and disappeared into traffic. Michael watched until it vanished. A cold feeling settled in his chest. Sarah hadn't been imagining things. Someone really was watching. But who? And why would anyone go to such extraordinary lengths to convince a little boy that his own father was dead? For the first time since leaving the courthouse, Michael realized something that chilled him even more. Reuniting with Ethan wasn't going to be the hardest part. Finding the truth would be. And somewhere, someone was determined to make sure he never did. The lie Sarah couldn't escape. The black SUV disappeared into the evening traffic. Michael stood motionless on the sidewalk, staring after it until its taillights vanished. For the first time in years, he realized his fight wasn't only about proving he was Ethan's father. It was about discovering why someone had worked so hard to erase him from his own son's life. The following morning, Michael barely slept. Sarah's words echoed through his mind. Please leave before they start watching again. She hadn't sounded angry. She had sounded terrified. Late that afternoon, his phone buzzed with a text message. Come to the old lake house. Alone. There was no signature. He didn't need one. He knew it was Sarah. The lake house had once been their favorite place. Long before lawyers, courtrooms, and silence had replaced laughter. By the time Michael arrived, the sun was beginning to sink behind the trees. The small wooden cabin looked older than he remembered. Paint peeled from the porch rails. The wind gently stirred the tall grass surrounding the property. Sarah was already there. She stood near the dock, staring across the still water. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Michael broke the silence. Tell me the truth. She closed her eyes. I wanted to for 6 years. Then why didn't you? Because I was afraid. She turned to face him. Her eyes were tired, carrying the weight of secrets she had held for far too long. I told Ethan you died. Hearing the words spoken aloud hurt more than Michael expected. You looked into our son's eyes, he said quietly, and told him his father was gone. A tear rolled down Sarah's cheek. I know. Why? She reached into her handbag with trembling hands. For a moment, Michael thought she might pull out another excuse. Instead, she unfolded a worn envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. Its corners were bent for being opened and closed countless times. I've carried this everywhere, she whispered. She handed it to him. There isn't a name. There never was. Michael carefully unfolded the letter. The message inside was short, cold, deliberate. It warned that if she tried to reunite Ethan with his father, people she loved would suffer. No signature, no address, no clue about who had written it. Only fear. I went to the police, Sarah said. They couldn't trace it. I changed my phone number. I moved. I even tried pretending it didn't matter. She looked down at her shaking hands. But every time I thought about telling Ethan the truth, another reminder came. Michael looked at her. What kind of reminder? Sarah hesitated. I'd find someone sitting outside the house. My mail would disappear. Sometimes the phone would ring. I'd answer, and no one would speak. The silence that followed felt heavier than the words themselves. Michael folded the letter carefully. You should have trusted me. I wanted to. Her voice cracked. So many times. She took a deep breath before continuing. Every birthday he asked about you. What was my dad like? Did he like soccer? Would he have been proud of me? She wiped away another tear. And every year, I lied. Her shoulders began to shake. Every lie I told him broke my heart. But I believed the truth would put both of you in danger. Michael wanted to be angry. Part of him still was. 6 years had been stolen from him. Nothing could ever return Ethan's first day of school, or the birthdays, or the bedtime stories. But as he looked at Sarah, he no longer saw someone celebrating those lost years. He saw someone trapped by them. Without saying a word, Sarah walked into the cabin. Michael followed. She knelt beside an old wooden dresser and slowly opened the bottom drawer. Inside were dozens of photographs. Pictures of Michael holding Ethan in the hospital. Pictures from Ethan's first birthday. Pictures of the three of them smiling together before everything fell apart. Sarah picked up one photograph with trembling fingers. I couldn't throw them away. Her voice was barely audible. They were the only proof that we were ever a family. Michael looked at the photograph. He remembered the day it had been taken. He remembered believing the future would always look like that. He carefully placed the picture back into the drawer. I can't forgive what happened. Sarah nodded. I know, but... He looked around the quiet cabin. I finally understand that you were afraid. For the first time in years, Sarah allowed herself to cry openly. Not because the pain was gone, because the truth had finally begun to replace the lies. As Michael turned to leave, something caught his attention. The envelope. In the fading light, he noticed a small embossed mark pressed into one corner of the paper. It wasn't a logo. It wasn't a name. Just a faint symbol he hadn't noticed before. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide their identity. But they hadn't hidden everything. Michael slipped the letter into his jacket. For the first time since seeing Ethan in court, he wasn't chasing memories. He had found his first real clue. And somewhere, the person who had written that letter had no idea the trail had finally begun. The boy who never stopped wondering. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and the familiar sound of children filling the playground. To everyone else, it was just another school day. For Ethan, nothing felt ordinary anymore. He sat quietly at his desk, staring out the classroom window. His teacher noticed he hadn't spoken since arriving. Ethan, she said gently, would you like to read the next paragraph? He looked up, startled. Oh, sorry. He stood, read a few lines from the book, then sat down again. Normally, he enjoyed reading. Today, every word felt distant. His thoughts kept returning to the courthouse, to the man with tears in his eyes, to the voice that had softly whispered, I'm your dad. At recess, children raced across the field laughing. Some played tag. Others chased a soccer ball between two backpacks that served as goalposts. Ethan wandered toward the fence. One by one, parents began arriving to pick up younger students from the neighboring elementary building. A little girl ran into her father's arms. Another boy proudly showed his dad a drawing he'd made. The man knelt, smiled, and ruffled his son's hair. Ethan watched without saying a word. His teacher, Mrs. Collins, stepped beside him. You look like you're carrying a very big question. Ethan kept his eyes on the playground. After a long silence, he asked quietly, do dads still love you after they die? Mrs. Collins felt her heart sink. She chose her words carefully. I think real love doesn't disappear. Ethan frowned. But can someone come back if everyone says they're gone? She looked at him with gentle concern. Sometimes adults make mistakes. Sometimes there are things children aren't told because the grown-ups don't know how. Ethan nodded slowly. It wasn't really an answer, but he appreciated that she hadn't dismissed the question. When school ended, Sarah was waiting outside. The drive home was unusually quiet. She glanced at Ethan several times. He sat looking out the window, absent-mindedly turning the zipper on his backpack between his fingers. Finally, she asked, how was school? It was okay. You seem quiet. I've just been thinking. Sarah tightened her grip on the steering wheel. She already knew what he was thinking about. Neither of them spoke again until they reached home. That evening, while Sarah prepared dinner, Ethan disappeared into his bedroom. He closed the door and pulled a small sketchbook from beneath his bed. Drawing had always helped him make sense of feelings he couldn't explain. He opened to a blank page. Slowly, he began to draw. First, a little boy, then a taller figure standing beside him. The two were holding hands. When he finished, he stared at the man's face. His pencil hovered above the paper. For several seconds, he didn't move. Then he lowered the pencil. The face remained blank. He didn't know why. It simply didn't feel right to draw it. Carefully, he folded the page and slipped it beneath his pillow. A quiet knock came at the door. "Dinner's ready," Sarah called. "I'm coming." As Ethan walked toward the kitchen, something caught his eye. His backpack had tipped onto the floor. The small dinosaur keychain swung gently from the zipper. He picked it up and smiled faintly. His grandfather Richard had given it to him years ago. He had always liked dinosaurs. For reasons he couldn't explain, seeing the keychain made him think about the man at the courthouse. 6 years is a long time, but I hope you still like dinosaurs. The words echoed in his mind. How had that man known? At dinner, Ethan barely touched his food. Sarah noticed. Not hungry. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he quietly asked, "Mom." She looked up. Did Dad ever like dinosaurs? The fork slipped from Sarah's hand and clattered against the plate. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. She forced a small smile. "Why would you ask that?" Ethan shrugged. "I was just wondering." Sarah looked away. Memories she had tried to bury came rushing back. Michael sitting on the living room floor, building toy dinosaurs with a laughing toddler. Trips to the Natural History Museum. Books about prehistoric animals scattered across the coffee table. It hadn't been a coincidence. Michael had known. He remembered. Sarah swallowed hard. "Yes," she whispered. He loved dinosaurs. Ethan lowered his eyes. A strange feeling settled over him. Not certainty, not confusion. Something in between. For the first time in his life, he wondered if the story he had always believed about his father was missing pieces. And somewhere across town, Michael unfolded the anonymous letter once again. This time, he wasn't reading the words. He was studying the faint symbol pressed into the corner. He had seen it before. He just couldn't remember where. But he knew one thing. The answer wasn't hidden in the letter. It was hidden in the past. And that past was finally beginning to catch up with everyone. Pieces of a stolen life. Michael barely slept. The anonymous letter lay open across his kitchen table beside a notebook filled with names, dates, and questions that had haunted him for 6 years. He circled the faint embossed symbol again. It wasn't a company logo. It wasn't a family crest. But he was certain he'd seen it before. His phone rang just after 8. An unfamiliar number. "Michael Carter?" "Yes. My name is Thomas Grant." The name meant nothing. "You've been asking questions." Michael tightened his grip on the phone. "I think it's time someone told you the truth." "Where?" "The old train station cafe on Willow Street. I'll be there in an hour." The cafe was nearly empty. An elderly man in a brown jacket waited in the corner. "You came?" Thomas said. "I've been waiting 6 years." Michael sat. "You said you know the truth." Thomas shook his head. "No, I know where the truth begins." He leaned closer. "You didn't lose your family. Someone took it." Michael froze. "Who?" "I never had enough proof." "Then why call me now?" "Because powerful people buried the evidence. Witnesses changed their stories. Documents disappeared. The court files weren't the only files that vanished." Michael showed him Sarah's anonymous letter. Thomas studied the embossed symbol. His expression changed. "You recognize it. I've seen something similar. I just can't remember where." Driving home, Michael passed the blue house where his family once lived. The old swing still hung beneath the oak tree. Memories flooded back. Then came another. Police at the front door. False accusations. Emergency custody orders. At the time, he believed the system had failed him. Now, he wondered if someone had carefully planned everything. That night, Michael spread every document across his dining table. Letters, court records, photographs, witness statements. Hours later, something caught his eye. A witness statement had been signed 2 days before the witness claimed to have given it. He checked another file, then another. The dates didn't match. Someone had made a mistake. For the first time in 6 years, the deception no longer looked perfect. Michael stared at Ethan's old photographs. "I couldn't protect you then," he whispered, "but I'm coming for the truth now." Across town, an older man stood in a skyscraper office overlooking the city. Without turning around, he asked, "Has Michael started asking questions?" "Yes." The man remained calm. So, he finally stopped believing it was an accident. He looked out over the city lights. "Keep watching him. We need to know exactly how much he remembers." Far below, the city carried on as if nothing had changed. But the first cracks in a carefully buried truth had finally begun to appear. And once the truth surfaced, there would be no hiding it again. The father everyone trusted. The next morning, Michael's phone rang before sunrise. He reached for it, expecting another unknown number. Instead, the caller ID stopped him cold. Richard Carter, his father. They hadn't spoken in months. Michael stared at the screen until the ringing stopped. A second later, it began again. This time, he answered. "Hello." Richard's voice was calm and measured, just as Michael remembered. "I heard about the hearing." Michael frowned. "Ow, I still know people at the courthouse." Michael said nothing. Richard continued. "I'd like to help." "Help?" Michael asked quietly. "Where was that help 6 years ago?" A long silence followed. Finally, Richard replied, "I know you have every reason to be angry, but anger won't bring Ethan home. I'm asking you to meet me." Against his better judgment, Michael agreed. An hour later, he pulled into the driveway of the Carter estate. The mansion looked exactly as it had when he was a child. Perfectly trimmed gardens, a marble fountain, tall iron gates. Everything appeared untouched by time. A house built to impress. A house that had never truly felt like home. Richard greeted him at the front door. His silver hair was neatly combed. His suit was immaculate. His expression carried the same quiet confidence that had made him one of the most respected businessmen in the state. He embraced Michael. Michael didn't return the hug. "I'm glad you came," Richard said. "I'm here for answers, and you'll have them." Richard led him into a spacious office lined with bookshelves and family photographs. One picture caught Michael's attention. It showed Ethan at 7 years old, smiling beside Richard in the estate gardens. Michael's heart tightened. He had never seen the photograph before. "You've been spending time with him," Michael said. Richard nodded. "He's my grandson, and I wasn't allowed to be his father." Richard poured 2 cups of coffee. "I know this has been difficult." "Difficult?" Michael couldn't hide the bitterness in his voice. "I lost 6 years." "I know." "No, you don't." Richard placed a folder on the desk. "I've arranged for one of the best family law firms in the country to represent you." Michael looked at the folder but didn't touch it. "I didn't ask for lawyers. I'm offering them anyway. There must be a reason." "There is." Richard folded his hands. "Ethan deserves stability." Michael looked directly into his father's eyes. "So do the truth and justice." For the first time, Richard's smile faded. Only for a moment. Then it returned. "I admire your determination. You always have." Something about the conversation felt wrong. Richard wasn't surprised by anything Michael said. It was almost as though he had expected every question. As Michael prepared to leave, Richard spoke again. "Oh, one more thing." Michael stopped. "I heard you met Thomas Grant." Michael slowly turned around. "I never mentioned Thomas." Richard smiled politely. He was a respected investigator. I've always kept up with people from that circle. It sounded reasonable, yet something about the explanation didn't sit right. Michael simply nodded and walked away. Outside, he paused before getting into his car. How had Richard known about the meeting so quickly? Only 3 people knew it had happened. Michael, Thomas, and whoever had called Thomas first. His thoughts were interrupted by another phone call. It was Thomas. "Don't go home yet," the older man said urgently. "Why?" I remembered where I'd seen this symbol on the letter. Michael's pulse quickened. Where? It wasn't on a document. It was embossed on executive stationery. What company? Thomas took a slow breath. "I'll explain in person, not over the phone. Meet me at Riverside Park. 1 hour. The call ended. Michael looked back toward the mansion. Richard stood behind the office window, watching him leave. Their eyes met for only a second. Then Richard slowly closed the curtain. An uneasy feeling settled over Michael. His father had offered lawyers, money, support, everything a concerned parent should offer. Yet every answer Richard gave raised another question. As Michael drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. A familiar black SUV pulled out from a side street. It stayed 3 cars behind him, never getting closer, never falling farther back. Someone was still watching. And for the first time, Michael began to wonder if the person he trusted most as a child might be the one he understood the least. The impossible truth. Michael arrived at Riverside Park 10 minutes early. The walking paths were nearly empty as a cool breeze rippled across the lake. Thomas Grant was already waiting on a weathered bench, a thick envelope beside him. "You weren't followed?" he asked. "I don't think so." Thomas gave a faint smile. "After everything I've seen, I don't think so isn't very comforting." He picked up the envelope. "I spent most of last night going through old files. I finally remembered where I'd seen that symbol." He slid a sheet of old corporate stationery across the bench. The embossed mark matched Sarah's anonymous letter exactly. "It's identical," Michael whispered. Thomas nodded. "It belonged to Carter Holdings, my father's company." "Yes." Michael wanted to dismiss it. Thousands of people worked there. One sheet of paper proved nothing. Thomas seemed to read his thoughts. "I know. This alone isn't enough." He pulled out several photocopies. "These are financial records from 6 years ago. Large payments have been sent to unfamiliar consulting firms. Look at the dates." Michael compared them with a custody timeline. His heart skipped. Several payments had been made just days before key witnesses changed their statements. It could still be coincidence. Thomas nodded. "That's what I told myself for years." He handed over one final document, an internal company memo. The approving signature had been blacked out. Only one line remained. "Approved by Executive Office." Michael's stomach tightened. Who removed the signature? I don't know, but someone wanted the payment seen, without revealing who approved them. Individually, the documents proved little. Together, they pointed in one direction. Someone inside Carter Holdings had quietly moved money while Michael's family was falling apart. "I've asked myself one question for 6 years, Thomas said. Who benefits from destroying a marriage? Michael didn't answer. One name had already formed in his mind. He simply refused to believe it. That evening, Michael covered his dining table with court records, financial statements, witness timelines, and the anonymous letter. Hours later, Sarah called. There might be something I forgot. They met at a quiet diner. Sarah removed an old address book from her purse. Inside was a folded receipt. On the back, someone had written a phone number and 3 words. "Call Richard first." The morning after the first threatening letter arrived, Sarah said quietly, "Your father came to see me." Michael looked up. "He did. He told me powerful families attract powerful enemies. He promised to take care of everything. Did he ask to see the letter? Yes. And I gave it to him. What happened? He told me to burn it. Michael slowly removed the letter from his jacket. You didn't. Sarah smiled through tears. I lied. For once. I didn't do what I was told. If she had burned it, the embossed symbol, and the first real clue, would have disappeared forever. Driving home, Michael couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. Richard knew about Thomas. Richard had seen the letter. Richard had appeared at every critical moment. And somehow, he was always one step ahead. Michael glanced at the dinosaur toy on the passenger seat. I promised I'd find the truth, he whispered. Across town, Richard stood alone in his office at Carter Holdings. His assistant entered quietly. Sir, Thomas Grant met with Michael today. Richard remained silent. Then he asked one question. Did he remember? I believe he's getting close. Richard closed his eyes. Then it's only a matter of time before my son comes looking for me. After the assistant left, Richard rested his hand on an old family photograph. For the first time, his expression wasn't confident. It was filled with regret. But whether he regretted what he had done, or simply regretted that the truth was finally catching up with him, no one could yet tell. A father broken by fear. Michael didn't sleep. The evidence covered every inch of his dining table. The anonymous letter, the financial records, witness statements, Thomas Grant's notes, Sarah's address book. Individually, none of it answered every question. Together, they pointed in one direction, toward Richard Carter. As dawn broke, Michael picked up his phone. He stared at his father's name for several seconds before pressing call. Richard answered almost immediately. Good morning, Michael. We need to talk. I expected you would say that. There'll be no lawyers, no assistants, no interruptions. Just us. Richard paused, then replied calmly. Come to the estate. I'll be waiting. The Carter estate felt unusually quiet. No gardeners, no housekeepers, no security guards in sight. It was as though Richard had deliberately cleared the house. Michael stepped through the front doors. Richard stood in the library beside the fireplace. He wasn't wearing his usual business suit. Instead, he wore a simple gray sweater, making him look less like the head of a corporate empire and more like an aging father. For a moment, Michael almost forgot why he had come. Then he remembered Ethan's frightened face. Dead people aren't supposed to smile. The anger returned. Michael placed the anonymous letter on the coffee table. You've seen this before. Richard looked at it quietly. Yes. You told Sarah to destroy it. I did. Why? Richard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the large window overlooking the gardens. I suppose, he said softly, there's no point pretending anymore. Michael waited. Richard folded his hands behind his back. When your mother died, his voice grew distant. I lost more than my wife. I lost the part of me that believed life was fair. The room fell silent. I watched the person I loved choose happiness over responsibility. Michael frowned. What are you talking about? Richard continued as though he hadn't heard. She wanted to leave this company. She wanted a smaller life, a quieter life. I begged her to stay. His shoulders sank. She left anyway. A week later, she was gone. Michael had heard the story his entire life. His mother had died in a car accident, but never once had Richard spoken about the days before it happened. I spent years asking myself one question. Richard turned slowly toward his son. What if I had convinced her to stay? Michael remained silent. Richard's voice became steadier. I came to believe something. Love makes people take risks. Love makes people ignore consequences. Love makes people vulnerable. He looked directly into Michael's eyes. Power keeps people safe. Michael shook his head. So you destroyed my family? I protected it. You call this protection? I call it preventing history from repeating itself. Michael felt his fists clench. You convinced my son I was dead. I convinced him he could grow up without the chaos that destroyed our family. You stole 6 years from him. I gave him stability. Michael could hardly believe what he was hearing. Richard wasn't lying. He truly believed every word. That frightened Michael more than any confession could have. You never hated me, Michael said quietly. Richard's eyes softened. No, I loved you. Then why? Because I couldn't bear watching you make the same mistake. You chose love over the family business. You were ready to walk away from everything. Michael's voice rose for the first time. Because Sarah and Ethan were my everything. The words echoed through the library. Richard closed his eyes. And that's exactly what terrified me. Silence settled between them. Not the silence of strangers. The silence of two men who loved the same family, but believed completely different things about how to protect it. Michael reached into his jacket and placed the photographs of Ethan on the table. You see these? Richard nodded. I missed every birthday, every first day of school, every Christmas. He learned to ride a bicycle. I wasn't there. He lost his first tooth. I wasn't there. He cried because he thought his father had died. Michael's voice broke. And I wasn't there. Richard looked away. For the first time, the certainty in his expression began to crack. Michael stepped closer. You didn't protect him. You robbed him. You robbed both of us. Richard slowly sat down in the armchair beside the fireplace. He suddenly looked much older than before. I never wanted him to hate you. Michael stared at him. I wanted him to forget you. The words landed like a hammer. Richard lowered his head. I thought forgetting would hurt less. A tear escaped despite every effort to hide it. I was wrong. The library door creaked open. Both men turned. Standing in the doorway was Ethan. His backpack still hung over one shoulder. Sarah stood a few steps behind him, her face pale. Neither of them had expected to hear the conversation. Ethan looked from his grandfather to his father. His small voice trembled. Grandpa, is it true? The room fell completely silent. Richard looked at the boy he had spent years trying to protect. For the first time in his life, he couldn't find a single word to say. The legacy. No one spoke. The silence inside the library felt heavier than every argument that had come before it. Ethan looked at his grandfather, then at Michael. His young face searched for someone to tell him this was all a misunderstanding. No one could. Richard slowly stood. His shoulders, once straight and confident, now seemed weighed down by years of choices he could no longer defend. Ethan, he said softly, I only wanted to protect you. The boy frowned. For my dad? Richard hesitated. I thought growing up without him would spare you the pain our family has known. Ethan looked confused, but it didn't. The simple answer hung in the room. Children often found the truth, adults complicated. Richard lowered his eyes. Michael walked toward Ethan, but stopped a few feet away. He didn't want to rush him. He didn't want to force another moment the way life already had. Ethan, Michael said gently, I'm sorry I wasn't there. Ethan looked up. Were you really trying to find me? Michael nodded. Every chance I got. I wrote letters. I filed petitions. I kept asking for another chance. His voice trembled. I never stopped being your dad. Ethan studied his face. For the first time, he wasn't looking at a stranger. He was looking at a man whose sadness matched his own. Richard quietly crossed the room and opened a leather briefcase resting on the desk. He removed a thick folder, then another. Finally, he placed a single document on top. "I've spent my life building Carter Holdings," he said. "It can all belong to you one day, Ethan." He slid the papers across the desk. "Houses, businesses, investments, everything our family has built." He looked at Michael. "I won't stand in your way anymore. There is only one condition." Michael already knew what was coming. Richard spoke calmly. "Leave with the boy today. Don't come back. Let him inherit a future that can protect him." The room became still again. Michael stared at the documents. It wasn't just money. It was security. The best schools. The best doctors. A future where Ethan would never worry about paying a bill. For one brief moment, Michael questioned himself. Could he give Ethan all of that? Or is he taking it away? Ethan noticed the hesitation. He slowly walked toward the desk. He looked at the expensive fountain pen, the legal papers, the family name printed across the top. Then he turned toward Michael. His voice was quiet. "If we leave..." Michael met his eyes. "Will you disappear again?" Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked forward until they stood face to face. Then he knelt. This time, unlike the courtroom, there was no fear between them. Only hope. "I will never stop coming back to you. No matter what. No matter where we live. No matter how hard life gets. I promise." Ethan searched his father's face. Children have a remarkable ability to recognize honesty. After a long moment, he smiled. A small smile, but a real one. He reached out and took Michael's hand. Then he turned toward Richard. "I don't want a mansion." His words were gentle, not angry. "I just want my dad." Richard closed his eyes. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts. He had persuaded politicians. He had built one of the most successful companies in the country. Yet he could not argue with the honesty of a 9-year-old boy. Michael stood. Without another word, he picked up the inheritance papers. He looked at them for only a second. Then, slowly, he tore them in half. The sound echoed through the silent library. Richard watched without trying to stop him. Michael placed the torn pages back on the desk. "You always believed power could protect the people we love." He shook his head. "You were wrong." Richard looked up. Michael squeezed Ethan's hand. "Love doesn't make us weak. It gives us a reason to be strong." No one spoke. There was nothing left to argue. The truth had already made the choice. Michael looked at Sarah. She nodded through tears. Not because everything had been forgiven, because healing had finally become possible. Together, the three of them walked toward the front door. Just before stepping outside, Ethan looked back. His grandfather was still standing beside the desk. The great house suddenly seemed much larger and much emptier. "Goodbye, Grandpa," Ethan said softly. Richard tried to answer. The words never came. The front door closed. The sound echoed through the mansion. For the first time in many years, Richard Carter was completely alone. He looked around the empire he had spent a lifetime building. Every room was exactly where he had planned it. Every success remained untouched. But the people he had sacrificed everything to protect had walked away together. Only then did he finally understand the cost of confusing control with love. The second chance. 3 months passed. Life didn't become perfect overnight. Some mornings still began with difficult conversations. Some evenings still carried the weight of memories. But little by little, the silence that had separated a family for 6 years was replaced by something stronger. Honesty. Michael rented a modest apartment near the community youth center, where he worked as a mentor. The pay wasn't impressive, but every afternoon, the gym echoed with children's laughter, helping them slowly heal the parts of himself that had been broken for so long. Sarah visited often. They didn't pretend the past had never happened. Instead, they chose patience, one honest conversation at a time. One Saturday morning, Ethan stood on the soccer field wearing a blue jersey. Michael watched quietly from the sidelines. Every pass, every tackle, every smile. Late in the second half, Ethan scored the winning goal. The crowd erupted, but instead of celebrating with his teammates, he searched the stands. His eyes found Michael, standing, clapping, smiling with unmistakable pride. After the final whistle, Ethan ran straight into his father's arms. "You played an incredible game," Michael said. "I knew you'd be watching," Ethan smiled. "I'll always be watching." That evening, Michael brought out a small package wrapped in faded blue paper. "I bought this for your third birthday. You kept it. I never stopped believing I'd find you." Inside was the little plastic dinosaur. Beneath it rested a letter Michael had written 6 years earlier. Ethan read it silently, then hugged the dinosaur tightly. "I never stopped liking dinosaurs." Michael laughed through tears. "I had a feeling." After a long silence, Ethan looked up. "Do you think we still have enough time?" Michael placed his hands on his son's shoulders. "We have the rest of our lives." Ethan wrapped his arms around him. This hug held no fear, only love. After a moment, Ethan smiled. "Thanks." He paused. "Dad." Michael closed his eyes. For 6 years, he had dreamed of hearing that single word again. No fortune, no mansion, no inheritance could ever compare. As the evening sun disappeared below the horizon, father and son walked home together. Ethan carried the little dinosaur beneath his arm, not because it was valuable, but because it reminded him that even when lies stole years from them, love had never stopped waiting. Final narration. Richard Carter believed the greatest inheritance a parent could leave behind was power. Michael discovered something far more valuable: the truth, the freedom to choose, and a love that refused to disappear. 6 years were stolen. They could never be returned. But the years ahead belonged to a father and son who had finally found their way back to each other. Sometimes the richest person in the world isn't the one who owns the biggest house. It's the one who hears a child smile and say, "Dad." If this story touched you, please like the video and subscribe to MindShadow Stories for more unforgettable stories of family, betrayal, redemption, and hope. And tell us in the comments, what part of Michael and Ethan's journey touched you the most? Thank you for watching. Until next time, cherish the people you love, and remember that even after the darkest seasons, truth and love can still lead us home. We'll see you in the next story on MindShadow Stories.